The social media age has led to a widespread visual culture where beauty is heralded as the ultimate value that anyone can purchase through the right surgeries and products. And while Gen Z is known for constantly virtue signaling diversity and individuality in what they preach, in practice, they are a highly conformist generation whose perception of the world is being deeply affected by the recent technological explosion of smartphones and social media. In this video, I'll be looking at the opposing poles of espoused versus actual beauty standards of the past decade, why people are more and more looking the same, as well as how the democratization of beauty through cosmetic filters and procedures has actually had a far more damaging effect on this generation than the previous unattainable supermodel ideal of the past. And so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then just keep watching the video. Part 1. Body positivity versus beauty exclusivity. The 2010s saw the rise of smartphones and social media platforms, with over half of Americans owning a smartphone in 2013, and apps like Snapchat and Instagram immediately gaining popularity. And while the origins of the digital era led to Photoshop and unrealistic standards in the celebrity media world, Instagram filters and the celebration of non-celebrity beauty quickly led to a culture where certain visual standards immediately rose to the top, and everyone using the app became in on the competition. Because the standard was so narrow and more people wanted social attention and validation on the apps without fitting the mold, some groups of people decided that if they couldn't join in on the current beauty standard, that they would have to try and beat it instead. And I've discussed before on my channel how social media led to the rise of virtue signaling and moral posturing as a way to gain attention while deflecting criticism. I honestly should make it its own really deep dive video, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to say that the body positive, fat positivity movement arose in a culture of a solidified ideal standard of beauty that they wanted to oppose on moral grounds, therefore not being able to be criticized. And while this movement still exists on TikTok and other social media platforms, I would argue that the peak of the movement occurred in 2018 when Tess Holliday graced the covers of Cosmopolitan, stirring controversy over the promotion of obesity as a positive or beautiful condition that is morally wrong to criticize. And with this counter-signaling as a more relatable form of gaining social capital, it would quickly succumb to the same problems that everyone engaging in the Impression Olympics has fallen to. They very quickly became hypocritical in their stance because while they embraced body positivity, they would hate skinny women and shame skinny women. When celebrities would lose weight, a lot of people would be very outraged over this because they're losing their representation, as if they have a right to control somebody else's body. And then they also broke themselves up into distinct classes within the movement of most to least oppressed. Basically, if you're small fat, you are more privileged based on your proximity to thinness. And if you're more morbidly obese, the more oppressed that you are. They also try to link fat phobia to racism and other true oppressions.
I mean, the fact that folks despise larger bodied individuals roots back to racism. It all roots back to racism.
And again, I think the psychological tool of this behavior is wanting attention and validation from others, but being completely unable to take criticism and instead viewing people criticizing you as them oppressing you or wronging you or harming you in some way, which has become all too common rhetoric in today's day and age. Not to already make this video a giant anti-woke rant, it's just this section. And then sadly, another reason that the body positivity movement, in my opinion, has mostly fallen off, I don't think it's as prominent as it was, is because a lot of these influencers have died. They've succumbed to their obesity-related diseases and causes, which is very sad and tragic. I have a lot of empathy for obese people because it is literally a form of self-harm. I've experienced binge eating for years. I've been overweight before, I've lost weight. I can relate to a degree. It's just terrible when people are self-harming and there's a community of people trying to say that it's okay and you're allowed to do that, which technically you are. Do what you want. But it is not a positive thing. It is actually very sad. But to take it back into the bipolar hypocrisy of the movement, saying that these things are positive, F your beauty standards, we create our own beauty standards, whatever, the actual reality is that there are certain standards of beauty that do get the attention and validation and likes and praise. And one way in the world that this has played out is in the Victoria's Secret woke rebranding campaign, where after long-standing criticism of Victoria's Secret angels upholding an unrealistic beauty standard with demands for more diversity and inclusion, they released a campaign with fat models that sunk their shares and profits. Now, some people say this was a marketing 4D chess move that Victoria's Secret gave people fat models so they'd miss the old angels and they wouldn't be criticized anymore because people would just accept what they really want. I don't know if they thought that far. I will say that the photos do look intentionally bad, like the posing and everything. Like, it does kind of seem like a fuck you to the people demanding more fat models. And also, they have not bounced back from this, like that business is still failing. But I will say there is a disconnect between what people say they want and what they actually want in their behaviors and actions, similar to the environment thing. You know, Gen Z is all about sustainability, but then they're buying clothes on Shein, which are probably made by slaves that they're just gonna throw into these landfills after washing one time. Like, there's just a lot of hypocrisy. You know, Gen Z is known for being so like political and like progressive and all of that, but like in reality, they're very conformist, and also they like go against their ideals all the time. People also criticized Victoria's Secret for pandering to the male gaze when that's the entire purpose of lingerie. Like, if you want to be comfortable, you wear a sports bra and like granny panties, not lingerie. Like, it is literally for the male gaze, unless you're like a lesbian or whatever. But we also see this same disconnect when it comes to the constant criticism and outrage over the brand Brandy Melville, which is a company that only makes clothes in the extra small size. People have long, for years, I feel like a decade at this point, been criticizing them for this. Unrealistic beauty standards for girls. They're all thin. They're all white, usually. All of this that is very upsetting to people. But then it's like, when you go to the Brandy Melville store, there is literally a line outside at like all times of people just lining up to buy these tiny shrunken baby tees. It's exclusivity, not inclusivity, that a lot of people actually want when shopping a brand. There have been brands that have like kind of run successful platforms on inclusivity, like Fenty and so on, but there's always going to be a market for exclusivity as well. But I will talk about that more towards the end of this video. And unlike the exclusive yet still kind of unique beauty standards of the supermodel era, we are now entering an age of algorithmic bias and familiarity bias in the attention economy that's leading people to more and more look the same. And with that, I'm gonna get into the next section of this video, which is Instagram face and the cult of cosmetic surgery. I remember shortly after TikTok came out, it was leaked that they had a beauty bias with the AI where it would basically do facial math on the videos to promote or hide videos. You know, you have to look pretty, you don't wanna look poor. People were shocked at this. I thought it was pretty obvious. Like, that's kind of how social media functions. But, you know, people were really outraged over that, which understandably so. But when a certain look or standard is pushed to you over and over again, that becomes ingrained in like what is familiar to you, and it becomes what you like. That's kind of how trends work. And because social media is peer influence to a degree that no other medium ever has been before, it's not just like people in magazines and celebrities you're trying to compare yourself to, it's your literal friends. And that, I think, puts the pressure to conform so much higher. But on top of just peers and influencers creating these new Instagram face standards, we see celebrities more and more resembling each other. They are getting rid of more and more of their unique features in favor of this weird averaged out conglomerate face. And when it comes to what Instagram face is, it's basically the modern look of lip filler, high cheekbones, lifted brows, Botox, facial filler, and so on. There's even a filter on TikTok that basically gives you this effect without getting any work done, which people say is making them even more insecure about how they look naturally, especially when some filters are so subtle that other people don't even know they're using filters. I think that's just how people are supposed to look naturally. To explain the kind of globalized racial averaging element of Instagram face as well, I want to quote Gia Tolentino in her famous article on Instagram face, saying, "There is something strange," I said, "about the racial aspect of Instagram face. It was as if the algorithmic tendency to flatten everything into a composite of greatest hits had resulted in a beauty ideal that favored white women capable of manufacturing a look of rootless exoticism. We're talking an overly tan skin tone, a South Asian influence with the brows and eye shape, an African American influence with the lips, a Caucasian influence with the nose, a cheek structure that is predominantly Native American and Middle Eastern. Basically, nobody has this face naturally unless you're like the product of some United Nations orgy or something going down generations. But welcome to 2024, where we're all about racial diversity and not at all about facial diversity. It also reminds me of the TV show Community when they're trying to come up with an ethnically ambiguous school mascot so as not to offend anybody, called the Human Being.
We are developing the perfect mascot. No stereotypical identifiers from any race or gender.
See, Jeff, this is a chart of the features we're staying away from. Pan-Asian eye folds, Irish chins, women's breasts.
Is that seal?
Oh, that is our human color wheel. It goes from seal to seal's teeth.
What do you think?
I think not being racist is the new racism.
And in part due to digital footprints outlasting the 20-year mark at this point and celebrities losing their mystique to the public, as well as the democratization of access to beauty through filters, YouTube makeup tutorials, and plastic surgeons literally being influencers, advertising their services on every platform, which will never not be insane to me. There is far less stigma around plastic surgeries, with people being very open about the work they've had done. And while, don't get me wrong, it is better for this information to be out in the open, I do think it's having this crazy effect, especially with how specific procedures have gotten. This normalization of surgery as something that like everybody's getting has really led to a further disconnect between what people think you're supposed to look like versus what they actually do naturally. I remember when the term Snapchat dysmorphia was formed, based on people going to the surgeon wanting to look like their Snapchat filters, which I thought was crazy because Snapchat filters literally like make you look like a dog. Like, they're so unrealistic when you look back on them. But obviously at the time it was so new, people really were wanting to look like that. But now with TikTok filters and the like, they are so subtle and so like actually like hard to distinguish. There's no flower crown on top of your head. It's really having a huge effect on this uptick in cosmetic surgery. It's also affecting people at younger and younger ages. There's literally children shopping at Sephora and doing anti-aging routines, skincare routines. And a lot of minors now literally look like women in their 20s because they're wearing so much makeup and getting so much filler. I swear I would be such an authoritarian parent in today's day and age if I had kids, because if one of my kids was leaving the house with all that makeup on, I would wipe their face like it was chloroform with a makeup wipe and just send them back to their room. Like, you're not going out like that, like, period. I should not even have to explain the dangers of having like a 14, 15-year-old looking like they're 27, going outside and they have filler and shit because you allow it. Like, we're living in a different time. But to help explain this shift into like total conformity and having one visual standard, I do want to talk about the death of the 90s supermodel and in its place, the rise of the Instagram influencer. Before Instagram face proliferated, making unattainable beauty standards attainable for the right fee, the peak of beauty was typically seen in supermodels and Hollywood icons. One of the most beloved decades of supermodels were the 1990s, and while these women's looks were clearly unattainable to 99% of people, it was understood that they were genetically gifted by birth and that the industry was built to be exclusive. Just the fact that, other than Kate Moss, you had to be 5'10" or taller to be a female supermodel already put you ahead of 98% of women in terms of height. And then on top of that, you also have to have a great body proportion and a beautiful face. Like, it was just simply so rare. And cosmetic surgery was not what it was today. You couldn't just buy your way into being a supermodel. But because it is so disconnected from the everyday real world experience, this is like the top 0.0001% of women, it just kind of helps sell the idea that it's a fantasy, that it is unattainable. Yeah, you buy into the fantasy when you get the product and everything, but you don't feel like you're competing with Naomi Campbell. And I know it's controversial to say these supermodels looked unique or whatever, but they didn't all have the same face. They might have had the same height and like waist to hip ratio, but their faces were different. But now, with models being man-made through plastic surgeries, they are more attainable to the public, and that puts you more as a player within the game. They actually are kind of a competition or more aspirational in a real concrete way than they were before. There's also more of a distance between audience and supermodel because supermodels are not attempting to portray a realistic life. They are not mining parasocial relationships for their influence and popularity. They're like mysterious and disconnected, whereas influencers do try to be just like you, sharing their morning routines and their grocery hauls and like giving their makeup tutorials and telling you about the work that they've had done. It's a little bit more personal. And that plays further into the peer versus fantasy dichotomy, and we are more likely to want to keep up with our peers rather than, people totally disconnected from us. This is why influencer marketing is such a booming business because people want to look like these influencers. And again, the exclusivity thing. High fashion models are selling, brands you will never be able to afford in your lifetime, whereas influencers are selling you fast fashion made by Chinese slaves, allegedly, aka clothing that you can actually buy so you can look like the influencer too. Influencers are literally selling their lifestyles and looks as being attainable, and that I think fundamentally changes the game when it comes to people buying in to a very specific beauty standard. And the fact that plastic surgeries are literally trends now, we go from everyone getting a BBL to people taking them out, regardless of people dying on the operating table. It's very dystopian to me. I think that's crazy. I think it would be really sad if you spent like $30,000 on plastic surgeries and then 2 years later, it's not even like considered pretty anymore. That to me would be really sad and embarrassing. So sorry if that's you. But anyways, that's my video. Like and subscribe if you liked it. Leave a comment. This one will probably be kind of controversial. Who knows? I never know. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.